So we can do it like in order here in the list of the chat. So maybe Eunice can begin to just present, making a little presentation.
Just, yeah, quickly introduce, say your name and
if you are a composer or flutist.
Who would like to start? Well, Helena, you came first, so perhaps.
Hello, I am a flutist, and I don't know. I am interested in all the techniques or like composing or improvisation. I don't know. I'm open. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Jean, I already know, and probably everybody knows you. Most people know you as well. But could you?
I don't think so. At least I only know you, Helen, to be honest. So I think it would be nice, like, to introduce like myself to the rest of the people. So hello, my name is Jaume. I'm 26 years old. I'm living like 1 hour from Barcelona. I'm a flute player, as you might notice. And yeah, I'm really interested in all extent techniques possible, like discovered and to be discovered. More in multiphonics. It's one thing that I'm really passionate about that, and I would like to work on multiphonics and some techniques that you have. If there is time, also the classic circle of breathing. It's quite a challenge for all the woodwind players. And yeah, like any comments of all the composition class, it could be really nice to develop some techniques and stuff. That could be really cool. Thank you.
Cool. So who would like to go next? Kostas, is that your
Hello.
name?
Yes. Hello.
Can you say your name, please?
Yeah, Kostas. Kostas. Hello. I'm a student composition student, 26 years old. I live in Utrecht, and I am from Athens, from Greece. And I would be really interested about some extent techniques and also some texture material that we can sound a bit, at least even from the headphones or from the speakers. So yes.
All right.
Thank you.
I see Unhai, do I say your name correctly?
Yeah, it's Unhei, right?
Okay.
I am Unhei, and I am a composer. I am studying in Freiburg, Germany right now. And I'm 23 years old. I am interested in more of a electronic acoustic ways to write with flute. Yeah.
Okay, cool. How about you, Tomislav?
Hello. Yes, my name is Tomislav. I'm a composer from Croatia. I studied in Barcelona. And concerning the flute language, I'm interested in basically all the things that are meaningful for contemporary flute repertoire. So not just acoustic flute, but electroacoustic approaches, extended techniques, and also a sort of, let's say, a language or gestures that are typical for the contemporary repertoire and for flute players.
Okay, thanks. All right. I see in order Evelyn is on the next square on my Zoom.
Hi. Hello. I'm just enter in the Zoom. I don't know if it's a presentation.
Introducing ourselves, a brief introduction.
Okay. So hi everyone. I'm Evelyn Frassini. I'm from Argentina, but I am moving to Switzerland next week. And well, I'm composer and sound designer, and professor also in universities in Argentina. I work with instrumental, mix and electroacoustic music. and also with different collaborations in films and multimedia pieces. And I think it's all. That's all.
Well, thanks.
Thanks.
Lydia, I met you, but could you tell us a little?
Okay, so hi, I'm Lydia. I'm 22 years old and I have just finished my composition degree in Seville. I'm from Spain. And I also studied flute for 10 years now. And yeah, I'm interested in music for flute in the contemporary field and also with the electronics. And yeah,
Okay,
that's it.
cool. Luisa?
Hello, I was having problems with the camera. So I'm Luisa, I'm from Valladolid. I'm 29 and I'm really interested in contemporary music and trying to get to the people connected with the contemporary art and trying to make something together with other artists.
Are you a flutist or a composer?
Yeah, flutist, sorry.
That's okay. Yeah. Okay, I have also Jean-Paul. Let's see.
Hello. It's really dark. Sorry. I'm John. I'm a composer in America, but I studied in London and just finished up the thesis. I'm really interested in just seeing what people are writing for flute, what new ideas they may have.
Okay. Okay. Great, thanks. I've got Jason, I'm not sure I could read him properly. He's still connecting. Have I forgotten anybody? Is there somebody? Oh. Okay. Waiting for Jason to connect. All right. Well,
Yes, just very fast. I just want to not introduce. Don't really. It's necessary, but I wanted to say thank you, Helen. She had to come with Ensemble Music Freak in the first program we planned for April. Then we had to cancel, unfortunately, this concert for reasons you may understand easily. But fortunately, Helen accepted to keep the workshop running as it was planned for April, and she adapted to this new situation, giving the classes, individual classes, which will take place tomorrow online, and to give this conference with all of you. So we are very glad to have her here, and that's all. I would just wanted to say that.
Well,
thank you very
much.
much.
Yeah. So hello from Cologne. I have even here, this is Heaven's Door from Stockhausen's piece, Heaven's Door. This is the actual door they made that you can that you play on for that piece by Stockhausen. I thought it would be a piece of contemporary music history I could show you here. But what I would like to know from you, because I have a lot of materials and we have a lot of different in areas of interest. I have a very, very basic, this is the flute sort of thing that I can share with you and just go through, if you like. Some of the basics, I'm sure that people will know a lot of this material every way, so I'll go through it just very, very quickly. And if you want a demonstration of something or have a question, just stop me. Otherwise, I think some of this material might be you've already looked at before. So what I've got here is more or less starting with the very basics of the range of the flute and what to look out for. First, there's a detailed thing about the low notes of the flute, which, as you can hear, they have a very special timbre because their overtone structure is such that they have a very, very weak fundamental. And this is important to know especially for electronic music and for anything working with a microphone, to know that it's especially good, because when you can play with the positions, you can come closer or farther away as you have more overtones with the higher notes. And if you have a mouthpiece or a headset, that such distinctions are not possible. So whoever is doing the sound has to be very careful when projecting the sound. It's just useful information to know for them. Going through this. Now this is a word about, this I have to say because it's sort of an issue that comes. Is it flute or alto flute? Should I write for flute or for alto flute? Now these lowest notes of the flute are fingered with the foot joint. And as you see, there's limited speed you can do and limited combinations. So my advice is that when you have fast passages that are in this range of the flute, consider using the alto flute, because the alto flute will give you, you won't be forced to use just your pinky as if you were a bassoonist. Unfortunately, we don't have the finger technique of, the pinky finger technique of bassoonists. So that's a little tip. I'll get into other aspects of which flute should I write for, C flute or G flute or piccolo or bass flute. That'll come up a little bit later. Middle C is very special. L'après-midi d'enfant, no particular overtones because it's the hollow tube of the flute. Second octave, I'll talk more about harmonics later, so I'll just skip over this. Third octave is the shining part of the flute, and this is where you might get into a situation, well, do I compose for flute or do I compose for piccolo? Now, I've made this handy chart, which meant if you've looked at my blog, you may have seen. It talks about where the piccolo is useful and where it's not useful, and in what dynamic and in which situations. I don't know if you can see this very well, but I'll try to make it a little bit bigger. I think the takeaway, I'll share this with you, of course, at the end. The takeaway from this is that there's a cutoff where you really, really need to use the flute. And here is this, these are fourth octave notes. Going from this high F, high C up to high F is something that as a composer, and if you're writing for younger players, to be especially careful with. It takes, this kind of technique takes a long time to develop. And even for mature players, it's best if you use them on the flute, if really in a hitting situation, like a strong forte. Sustained notes will not work because you need an awful lot of air to produce them and a lot of energy to produce them. So if you have sustained passages or quiet passages, use this range on the piccolo. And I'd like to stop here and ask you if you have any questions about this, because it's a very, I think it's a very important topic, or maybe not for you, maybe you haven't had this issue, but does anybody like to ask questions about this? And hear differences on the flute or the piccolo? Or is a picture worth 1,000 words and I can shut up? All right, well, I'll move on from there then. Good. Okay, here's the list of trills to avoid, and this is for the same reason. And this is true for all flutes, for C flute, alto flute, and bass flute. Written because, again, we're not bassoonists, and we have a very difficult time moving our fingers really fast in these trills, this combination of moving sideways our fingers. Now, Okay, it's very important to know if you want to make special timbres about harmonics on the flute. I've got a list here of harmonics that are not available on the flute. And this is because what this means is the written notes that you see are not available as a harmonic. You can, of course, produce harmonics from these notes that you see. They're not available as a harmonic because there's no fundamental below them that will produce that sound. And you may be wondering, here, you see a logical octave here, but then why aren't E, F available as an octave either? And that's because these notes are played as octaves anyway. They use the same fingering, and they are the octave that you hear. All right. Is there any question about this? About why this is not possible, or?
So, like, they can't be played as pedal notes even, right?
They can be played as pedal notes.
Oh, and like they can put more harmonics on them, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. But they can't be, you can't use them as write them as a flageolet. But as a fundamental for a flageolet, yes.
Yep, got it.
Okay. All right. Moving right along. Some ideas about multiphonics. Here we go. Just some basic things that I write for composers, writing in the fingering or for extended passages. This will clutter the notation, provide the fingering, performance instructions. Use intuitive templates. I give you a link for that. Your source of multiphonics. There are many of these. I recommend against certain ones like the virtual flutist, because it's a theoretical projection and not an actual, something that's been actually thought out and tried and tested from flutists. Karen Levine has a very good source. I recommend that. There are mistakes in the book, so do check with your local flutist before you put anything in writing. Now, giving the flutist a choice of multiphonics, I've got a little thing here, as you see on the side. When you choose a lowest note as the center of your multiphonic, you will have fewer possibilities. And that's for the same reason that I explained before about the harmonics. That's because these notes have nothing below them which to help. So for example, if I wanted to play a multiphonic on this low C, my only possibility would be a harmonic multiphonic because I can only overblow it. What happens when I'll explain to you, when you play a multiphonic, what happens is that you have a fingering and you take the tube, the length of the tube, say it's this long. When I finger this G, my tube is this long. It has just this length. And to produce a multiphonic, I need to vent something. So I either do that by opening a half hole or opening one of the fingers here or opening one of the trill keys, which makes one of these keys, there it is, open up. And that splits the length of the tube and produces a multiphonic. So the thing is that when you play a low note, logically, you have more places to split. But if you open one of the keys, then your tube will no longer be so long. So in other words, for the longest note of the flute, my tube is this long. But as soon as I open something, it'll no longer be that long, and you won't have that low note be split. The low note won't come. That might have been a little complicated. Does anybody have any questions about this? I think the takeaway from this is when you write multiphonics for the flute and you want to leave it up to the composer, start with the second octave of the flute. As I mentioned here, this second multiphonic here from C up give you many, many more possibilities for multiphonics. First octave. Okay, now, a big thing that I often have as an ensemble player, please take care of the dynamics. If you look at Karen Levine's book, she's very careful about saying under which circumstances you can use multiphonics, and always take that with a grain of salt. It's a general guideline, but really try it with this before. And if you're working with young players, especially, try them out first, is my advice. Now, in an ensemble situation, when you're trying to produce very quiet sounds like some of the multiphonics have, if the flutists cannot hear themselves, they cannot produce the sound. And that's because we need to have feedback in our ears. And this feedback in our ears from our sound helps us to make adjustments here. But if we can't have our own feedback, we cannot produce the multiphonic, because our mouth won't know what to do because we can't hear ourselves. Does this make sense, what I am saying? Am I speaking too quickly?
It makes perfect sense.
Okay, I'm not, all right. Good. All right, so those are some basic guidelines. I'd like to leave the floor open now because I know some of us have been expressed interest in these techniques. Are there questions about them? I can tell you that most multiphonics that you will find can be transferred from the flute to the alto and to the bass flute, as long as they do not use an open hole. In other words, most alto and bass flutes do not have the possibility to have holes. I do have open holes, but it's not standard. And I think they translate very well, the multiphonics that you find on the flute. They translate well to alto and to bass as well. Now, a common trick that I've been telling composers about, I'm a big fan of small interval multiphonics. And I'll see if I can produce any of them. I'll play the notes separately. Is this okay? Are you getting the audio? I'm not sure how it's transferring.
Yes, yes.
We can hear the audio, but it's not high quality, so.
Not very good, okay. Actually, you don't need to hear this very well. What I was going to demonstrate is just, you have a multiphonic, it's very weak and rather unstable, but adding flutter tongue can sometimes assist.
We can hear you, Karen.
Okay, good. Sometimes this can assist the production and stability of these very, very small multiphonics, small interval multiphonics, I mean, especially on the lower flutes. So that's just is that mixing flutter tongue and multiphonics can sometimes be a help, can be a big help to the performer. That is, if the performer has a good flutter tongue technique. Not all flutists can do flutter tongue well. If your native language is Asian, I've come across this a lot of times. People with Chinese or Japanese as a native language have difficulty doing flutter tongue. So also take that into mind if you're writing for a particular player. Any questions about this so far? Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
So are the multiphonic trills are only possible on the very small intervals, or also like big intervals?
Multiphonic trills?
No, flutter tongue, sorry.
Flutter tongue. No, they should be available in all ranges.
All right.
My point was that they can help with a small interval.
Yeah. Okay.
Small interval, but they can be used in every.
Perfect. Thank you.
Helen?
Yes.
For instance, when you're a flute player and you see the score and you have the chance, so you the multiphonic is written, but you don't have the fingering, because there are some composers that are really kind and they are writing you the fingering, which is like, we really appreciate that, but some don't. So how, if we don't have the book, for instance, how we deduce ourselves? There is a technique, or there is some explanation to figure out the fingering, or just keep trying?
Yes, there is a resource that you can use. I'll have to look for it later and send you a link. Do you know Georg Itzlis? Georg Itzlis is a Hungarian flutist composer who wrote, he has something, I'll share you, you can Google it yourself. I'll send you in the chat. Oh, if somebody's sending me, okay. Okay, it's called Flubel. It's called Flubel. And if you're a flutist and have difficulty finding a multiphonic, you can look this up online. And it's kind of complicated, but once you understand how his system works, you can figure out the fingering. He shows you a chart that gives the first note and then the second note, and you put them together and you have a fingering. I'll, yeah, Google that. And I can, as I said, I can put this in the presentation that I'm giving you now. I can give you the link to that later.
Fantastic. Thank you.
The other thing I do is to just look in the books. You can look it up. That's often what I do. And then if I think the composer doesn't have a particular one in mind, I just make something up. I mean, maybe another flutist has another idea, those of you who are flutists, but I know, for example, that if it's based on E, I take the E fingering, and I think of all the alternate fingerings I can think of for E, and try them. Try them with overblowing, try them with underblowing as well, and see what works. Is there any other advice somebody would like to give other flute players out there? All right, well, as I said, for composers, it's always helpful to write the fingerings, and I'll show you some in my next presentation. I've got some examples from the repertoire I'll show you. So if there aren't any more questions, I'll move on. And please, if you have a question, say audio, tell me, because I don't see all of your pictures. Okay, moving right along. This is a joke that I made. If you've seen my website, you've seen this before. Should I use multiphonics for my ensemble piece? And this just gives you a set of parameters, whether you want true polyphony or not, what the dynamic is, and I'll skip over it now. You can laugh at it later. All right, I'd like to talk about jet whistles now, because this is a great effect. And I often see it done in, or let's just put it this way, in a way that's very ineffective. So a really high-powered jet whistle needs time to set up. And you need a fast burst of air. So you don't need a full set of lungs to do it, but you need to have at least a normal set of lungs. I mean, you can't play it at the end of a phrase, as I've written here in this example. It just won't work unless you have time to take a breath. Can I ask you, can you see my cursor when I move something?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. All right, so the takeaway from this is to just leave the flutist time, not only to make sure they have air in their lungs to produce this, that sort of high-powered sound, but also for them to come from normal playing position to this, where they have to cover the flute. I can do it pretty quickly, but it still takes time. Any questions about jet whistles? I'll show you some more examples from the repertoire in the next presentation. All right. So this is a sort of an ongoing list of harmful things that I've come across that composers have asked me to do. The one thing is slamming the hands into the key work. Key clicks are fine, but I honest to goodness, I had a composer who wanted me to do like this. I had to keep my hand up like that and then slam it down onto the key work. And for some reason, she did not understand that this was harmful for the flute. Please don't ask any instrumentalist to do this because these rods and posts are bendable. They can break, so please don't do this. Immersing part of the flute in water is also not a good idea because the pads are made out of organic material. Most of them are. There are plastic ones these days, but the standard issue is they're made out of organic material. And even when they get moist from the condensation here that comes through the tube from normal breathing, they can swell up and not close anymore, or even split. And then once you've done that, you cannot produce any low notes. Messed up for the rest of the concert. So please don't ask flutists to immerse any part of their instrument in water, unless it's just the head joint. This could be something, but not the end, because there's cork here as well. And if any water gets into the cork and that swells up, you're also out of luck. All right. Now this is something that not everybody cares about. Myself, I have two piccolos, one that's plastic and one that's made out of wood, so that I can do techniques which use a covered embouchure technique. By this, I mean also jet whistles, where I close and I actually put my mouth on the mouthpiece. As it says, saliva contains these enzymes. And if your player for whom you're writing has a really good piccolo, this blowing edge was carved very, very carefully by the maker. And any sort of degradation to it will, over time, change their sounds. So I tend to ask composers not to write these kind of techniques for the piccolo unless they know that their player has a plastic piccolo. Extreme temperatures are also, it's not really something that I get asked to do, but I find myself in situations where I have to play in extreme temperatures. It's also just a fact that certain insurance policies will not pay for your repairs if the temperature is over a certain degree, if it's too hot. And this is especially important for wooden instruments. Heat will make it warp and cold will make it crack. So, yeah. Is there anything else, or is there anything anyone would like to share that they've had to perform, which was not ideal for their instrument? Because I'd like to add to this list. Okay. All right, so I'll move right along. I think we've reached the end of this. No, pet peeves. Okay, do you really want to hear about this? Actually. Okay, this first that I have here, using empty note heads to indicate air or aeolian sounds in an ensemble situation. I'll go into more detail about this in my next presentation that shows examples from the repertoire. Basically, I can say, if you're writing for a solo piece for a particular player, don't worry about this. You can use whatever notation you want, as long as the player is happy with it. But if you're writing for orchestra or ensemble and you need your instrumentalists to be together, please don't use aeolian sounds with empty note heads. By that, I mean so that you cannot tell the difference between a half note and a quarter note. But like I said, I'll show you some examples coming up. Extended techniques stacked up on one on top of another. You get phase cancellation, you get interference, you get distortion, which doesn't add to the sound. So, work with the flutist, find the few that work together, like flutter tongue and multiphonics. Singing and playing is very good, something you can mix, singing and normal playing. Singing and playing and multiphonics does not always work. Sometimes it does. Singing and playing and multiphonics works especially if you have harmonic multiphonics. multiphonics that are just based on a normal harmonic system, like you have, for example, C, C, G, E stacked on top of that. If you add the voice to that, you get extra dynamics. But to some of the more diffuse and very close interval multiphonics, the voice can just distort them. So it's best just to work with the player and find out what really works well. Okay, not flute related, but landscape layout for parts. As you can see, my dear colleague on the cello has shown Griset's Période, and what a pain in the ass that was to play for that reason. Other than that, it's a great piece. Okay, so this is the end of this presentation. Do you have any questions at this point, or anything that you'd like to share from a flutist or a composer perspective?
I have a question, if it's possible.
Sure.
Well, I'm interested in the positions around the mouthpiece or on the mouthpiece when an instrumentalist is speaking into the flute. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's an interesting effect, and I wonder what is the best way for the spoken words to be heard. Not articulated quite well, but just to be heard in a volume sense, you know, like.
This is a topic I like a lot. So the best way for the notes to be understood and heard is in normal playing position, mm-hmm. where your mouth are open. And if you're asking the flute just to use an Aeolian sound and not a normal sound, because producing a normal sound and producing speech are mutually not compatible. So actually, I'll do this on the bit, because sometimes on a bass flute, if you whisper, you get a lot more resonance. Mm-hmm. So this is a situation where you can use a lot. Now, there's one technique that I like to do a lot, and this is only if you are lucky enough to have two microphones. If you have a headset microphone, and if you have a microphone that you can put at the end of the flute like this. And if you have this, you can get very good techniques by, as I showed you, talking into the end of the flute. That you make all kinds of effects like this. I don't know how much you can hear about that.
Oh, very, very good. Yes, very clearly.
Because once you have that, you can do a lot of things. You can do a lot of vocal techniques, a lot of flutter tongue techniques, a lot of speech, a lot of consonants, a lot of things mixed with tongue ram.
So two microphones are needed, because I'm just about to write a piece for a bass flute and electronics. Mm-hmm. So this is a very good advice. Thank you.
Yes, I love this. I love this when I have the freedom to be heard from both sides.
Fantastic.
Yeah. That's basically. Any other questions about singing and playing, or using speech and playing? I do have a YouTube video, which I can send you the link to. I can include the link to in this presentation, that goes into detail about using speech and flute sounds.
Thank you very much.
I'll send you that later then.
Thank you.
I have a question, if it's possible. I was wondering if you can send us some examples of writing this kind of technique, speaking and playing at the same time.
Yes, I'll do that. Actually, I'll share this with you. Why don't I just, well, if you give me just one moment, I will find it on my hard drive here, and I will share it with you. Just give me a moment. This piece is actually Jaume. You have this as well. This is Rebecca Saunders' Bite, which I premiered of her a couple of years ago, and I recorded last year. This piece, we developed a kind of technique where there's a lot, the bass flute sound is very integrated into speech. And this is something that she really has refined. Share my screen now that I think I've got it up. Good. Here we go. It's a bit small, but perhaps you can see that there's text written over.
Yes. Yes, yes.
And this I'll demonstrate you. The idea is not to really speak, but to say. This sort of, and where she has words, the good thing is that the flutist here is free to actually decide how much speech can be perceivable and how much of it is just really a coloration of the sound. She leaves that really open.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of, if you can see my cursor where it says awful, you don't really say, oh, like, more of a shaping of the sound.
We cannot hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Hang on. One moment. I'm going to reshare this. So is that more? Okay, sorry, this doesn't work very well. But the point is that this was her idea about it, and she leaves a lot of freedom to the performer what to make understandable and what not to make understandable. I'll show you. There is, it's not in this piece, but there are parts where it's very free. No, she doesn't write text there either. Sorry about that. I'm thinking about another piece. But here you see this is another example. You have here the sun goes out, the sun goes out, using the consonants as a type of articulation.
Okay. Helen, I have a question. This kind of writing, it's very open in a way, because I think if you read that, there are a lot of different timbres that you can play. So the question is, did you work the piece with Rebecca?
Yes.
So, okay. And she finished the piece after working with you, I think.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll tell you how this piece started, because I think it's an interesting interaction. At first, she gave just a number of multiphonics. We found multiphonics that sounded well on my bass flute and were a little bit breathy anyway, which helps speech. So she had a list of multiphonics, and then she had a list of text, just sentences like the sun goes out or barely chair, something like that. And at first, this was another piece, but it worked that I had the freedom to put the text to the certain multiphonics. So there was that experimentation in the other piece. And then once she sort of got used to this and got used to what I could do and found some things that she liked, she wrote it down so that there was no longer such freedom for me to choose. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course. Of
okay.
course.
That's how this sort of multiphonic plus speech or plus Aeolian sounds sort of work. Oh, this might be something also interesting, because this is a kind of interesting thing that she has writing here. You see, She has
Yes.
things for here. This is a typical square thing. That means going inside the flute, going from normal playing position to. So you have things that are also not only inside the flute, but as you see, this looks like a violin up bow. This also means to inhale. So you have the difference between speaking or inhaling and exhaling, which is something she does in her vocal pieces a lot, and that she's incorporated into the pieces a lot. One thing about inhaling and playing is that it's really only, well, I don't say this, but it's most effective if you have flute closed. You can have a different. Can you hear that? Or like this. So that's an example of this. You got inhale here, and then exhale, and then speaking. So any more questions about this? Because this is a good segue into the next, some of the more examples I wanted to give from the repertoire. But are there any other questions before I go on?
Is the score commercially available, or maybe somewhere by Peters? Okay.
You can get it from Peters. There are two versions. One for a bass flute with B foot and one for a bass flute with C foot.
Okay, thank you.
And Rebecca prefers to use as a standard the one with B foot as the, I don't know, teaching or as the default one, so to say.
Thank you.
All right, I'll stop sharing. Now, okay, so if there's anything else, shout now, or I'm going to just share my screen again. This next bit. And whoops, we don't need, let's not get ahead of ourselves. All right. Can everybody see my screen, or can anybody not see my screen? Shout. Okay, I'm going to start with this piece by Rebecca then. See if I can go into. There we go. All right. So what I'd like to do with these couple of pages are just to point out some things that I think are good, as you see in the left-hand column here, and I kind of don't know about that in the other column. And this refers mostly to notation, not the musical abilities of the composer. Now we're specifically talking about the notation. I played this a couple of nights ago, Skin by Rebecca for solo vocalist and small ensemble. As you can see here, she's got the going in, covering the mouthpiece, and going out, which I put under the good column. Clear indication of inside versus outside sounds, and it gives scope for the transitions, using arrows going to and from. A good thing also that the multiphonic fingerings are given. What's not good here is that she gives them as a fingering and a number. At the beginning in her score, she numbers the multiphonics, which is a good thing to do if you want to refer to them by number later in the player's part. But the player does not need the fingering and the number. It's just too cluttering. Does anybody not know what I'm talking about? Okay, good. So what I like here also, I put under the good column, you've got the air sounds. Here's what I was talking about, the air, you have a different note head, but it's not always written as an empty note head. So you see the difference here between a half note and a quarter note. And if she wants the transition, she writes a transition, or if she wants, only half air, then she indicates half air, which I think is a very good way to notate Aeolian sounds in an ensemble situation where rhythm is important. All right. She's got another cool thing, which is here. She has this squiggly line, which indicates flutter tongue, plus articulations, which can be a nice effect. In this case, hopefully you can hear me, you've got the flutter tongue and the small interval multiphonic. But on top of that, she's got Sort of going la, 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 la. And with that, you can indicate a speeding up from quick la 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 to fast la 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 while flutter tonguing. Which, if you could hear that, if you heard that, I think is an effective technique, and it's well notated. The only drawback, which I put here, this flutter tongue symbol just needs to be a little bit more compact, or the note stems need to be longer, because I don't know if you can see here, it's hard to recognize. That can be taken as a flag sometimes, and this is a problem later in the piece as well. It's just that it's too far joined to the stem, so that could be seen as a dotted eighth note or something, or a dotted half note. Any questions or anything you see in, in here that I may have missed?
Helen?
Yes?
I presume that the frullato is like throat, right? Not in front.
Yeah, it's up to the player, but when you have, it's mixed with articulations, then it's assumed that it's in the back. But if you have a way of doing it in front and giving the articulation, that's also fine. She's really not specific about that.
Okay.
It's really, and I'll say a quick word about flutter tongue, about doing it in the front or the back. There are certain players who can only do it one way, like me. I can only do it in the back. Jean-May, do you do it only in the, can you do both?
I do both.
Okay. And how do you find that there's a big difference in sound when you do one or the other?
Oh yeah, sure. The one in the front is way more airy, more breathy, because you're doing like this on the tip of your lips, and all the air spreads out. And on the back is more for the lower register actually. So from C4, C5, like in front, and then on the lower register on the flute or alto or bass flute, I'm sweeping to the one on the back. It's more clear, but the other way around, if I'm thinking out loud, I would say like doing in front of frullato in the lower register, it doesn't come any sound actually. It's more air than pitch actually. So.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. So I'd advise composers to be careful when specifying which kind you want. And I don't know how you other flutists feel, but I also feel sometimes in an ensemble situation, you don't really hear the difference often. I mean, it's been my experience. Maybe other people have a different experience. But if you're writing for an ensemble, it's best to leave that up to the flutist, how they can produce it the best, whether in the front or the back. Does anybody, other flutists, have another opinion?
I can only do one type, so it's also the same.
Okay, so you can confirm this. Better to leave it, in some cases, to leave it up to the player, unless you know specifically a kind of sound you want. All right, let's move on to the next. I think I can go back. Yes, let's move on to Lachenmann, because he uses lots of these sounds. I've got his notation here, what I think is good, what's not so good. All right, you've got he does the air noise inside the flute. By inside the flute, I mean with the embouchure hole covered, instead of not like this, but like this, by using square note heads. And he does the normal Aeolian sound, that by using diamond note heads, which I think is a very clear concept. I like this. It's just that he doesn't really write them clearly, big enough. In other words, the note heads aren't really big enough to make a quick distinction. And this piece is very fast. You have to read things quickly. And it would be better if he had done that, made the note heads just a little bit bigger. Other things, a clear sign for jet whistle. I kind of like that it's high up here. It shows that something goes up high. As I mentioned, it doesn't show what direction it should go. Well, I don't know if you could hear that, but I did one jet whistle and the other one like that, which is probably okay. He leaves it up to the player. That's also fine. It's useful sometimes for the player to know also if it's really a, or if you want an articulation like a kind of sound. If it's up to the player, that's fine. But if you really want a sound, it's good to write that graphically. Or if you want a sweet like that with a real at the end, that's also good to indicate if that's what you're going for. I don't have an example of that at the moment. I'll have to find one and add it to, which I will do later. Another thing which I maybe would not recommend from the score is this notation for key click. It looks too much like one of the air sounds, and it's just, there's only this flag at the end, which indicates a click. And for me, that's not intuitive enough. I'm more used to seeing a kind of X, as I wrote here, to indicate a key click. And once again, when the music is fast, it's great if you have something that's just intuitive that players are used to seeing and they know immediately what to do. So that's Lachemann. Great piece, a lot of good notation practices. Any questions on anything you see?
Yes, I cannot understand how do you make the jet whistle. Can you explain?
Ah, sure. Okay.
So,
in order to produce the jet whistle, what you need to do, as I mentioned, you need to have time to cover the mouthpiece. So you need to go from playing position to covering the mouthpiece. And it works best even if you can put the whole of your mouth into it, then you get even more power. You don't need to do this, but you can do it. But it helps. So what you do is you cover the mouthpiece and you make a very strong airstream, and with your tongue, you have to also push the air. When I do a jet whistle, without the flute, it looks like, that's exactly what I'm doing. Does this make any sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. All right. Let's move on. We've done Rebecca. Here is Luigi Nono. Das darf ihm klar sein. Now, this was a very special piece. It presents a lot of possibilities and also a lot of problems for the player. I'll just go through them one by one. A good thing, he distinguishes the air, the full air sound, as I said, from something half air, which is mixed air and sound. And he does it, as you see, full air sound, you have open note heads, and the half air sound by writing these open triangles on the note stem. As I wrote in my other column, it's not always immediately noticeable because there's no change of note head. I mean, this looks like a normal note, and if you're reading too fast, you may not notice this little diamond. I leave it up to you. I just offer it as a possibility. Now, the full air sounds do what I usually don't like, in that they're written with open note heads, but here it's a solo piece and the time signatures and exact rhythms are not really necessary here, so it's okay. Yeah, big bad thing. The fingerings for multiphonics are not given. They're only available in the manuscript. You need access to the manuscript to know what fingerings that Roberto Fabriciani used. Because Luigi Nono wrote this together with Roberto Fabriciani. So this is kind of a pain. So either you look them up yourself or you find somebody who has the manuscript. Now, here's about using two staves for the flute. Sometimes this is a good idea, sometimes it's not. Sometimes where it's a really good idea, when you have a vocal line, you're writing for flute and voice, or flute and, no, for flute and voice, because then you have pitch material that you need. It's often good to use 2 staves, especially if you have them really moving independently. If it's just a single note with a voice, like, then you can write it on the same stave. But I have no idea what he's doing, why he wanted this. I think this here is an artifact from the manuscript. If you look at the manuscript, you'll see that it's also written in a very strange way. And I think this is how the publisher wrote it. I just use this as an example to think about when you do use double staves for a flute, really think about why you're doing it. And yes, if it's going to be an intuitive, something that the flutist can intuitively understand. All right. He's also got this black square, which means covered hole. And I assume that this is a tongue ram. You've got kind of a click with a covered hole. I don't know, it's not completely clear. And what's also not clear is that you don't have a pitch for the tongue ram. Now, as most of you may already know, when you cover the hole of a flute and you blow, make a percussive sound, you will get a major seventh below the tone that's written. I'll give you an example. Here's my G, and here's it's not a seventh. See, even here you can run into problems, I think. I'll do something in the first octave. Lower down on right hand. E. You hear an F. Here you hear the seventh, the major seventh. So, if I want to hear this E as a tongue rammed pitch, I need to finger E flat. Is everybody with me so far? Might have gone a little fast.
No, it's okay.
Okay. So this is yeah, just it's useful if you write a tongue ram and you want a particular pitch for that tongue ram, is to make sure that the player knows that it's the correct pitch. I often see it done where I have the correct pitch written above and then the fingered pitch written below, kind of chord. And yeah, so it's very clear. What we've got again here, another thing that I liked is he has a clear indication by arrows of whether the player is to inhale and exhale. And I have to admit, I like this notation a little bit better than Rebecca's, where she uses the violin up bow, down bow. For me, it's just more intuitive. When I see something forward that I exhale, and I see going, something coming the other way that I inhale. So that's something from the score I thought I would point out. Good thing. Now, does anybody see anything else that they would like to discuss or ask a question about this example? Okay, all right. Okay, those are the only examples that I have from the repertoire for this presentation. I know that some of you have written flute pieces for the concert on Sunday. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering how that's going, if there are any questions about that. Anything they'd like to share? Yes?
I've written a piece, and thank God I have a fantastic performer, and she's really giving her all. So I was wondering maybe if I could send you the piece just to get a feedback, if it's possible.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
About the writing and if everything is clear enough.
Well, if there aren't that many questions, I mean, you could share it now and show it to the class, show us what you've done, and I can comment on them. Mm-hmm. I should ask first, is there anybody else who'd like to do this? Are there any other subjects we'd like to discuss before the end of the class? And otherwise, yes, let's do this then. Tomislav.
Okay, just let me please find the PDF. Just a second, please.
Sure. Find the file, first of all.
Okay, the Spanish version is here. Share screen. It says host disabled attendee sharing.
Let me see if I'm the host. Let me do one quick thing. I think if I can make you a co-host, then you'll be able to share. Let me find you on the participants list. I see you. Here you are.
Tom, they just wrote in the chat that you should try again.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Okay. Cool. Can everybody see it?
Yes.
Yes. So yes, this is the piece I've been writing and rewriting together with dear Luisa. So considering the multiphonic writing, is this enough maybe for instance, the multiphonic here? It is written and I have the fingering in the performance notes. Do I have to write it maybe here in the score, or this is enough?
You could do that, but you don't need to do that. My tip is that if you only have one or two multiphonics that you use, then yes, write them. But if you have many multiphonics, then that makes for a lot of clutter. And you don't need. Then it's better to do like you.
Yeah, I have this one, for instance, which this one is tried out, so I went with this one. Also wanted to ask you, so this beginning, I have a voice, which is written in the separate stuff, and here in the upper stuff, this is the flute, and as you see, the indications of half tone, full tone, or where is it? So that's clear. So, for instance, when the instrumentalist is whispering into the instrument, I want to have this sort of crescendo coming to mezzo forte. And I think, is it easy for instrumentalists to just end on the sung tone, or do I have to give them more cesuras? Or because I want to have this free flow into the voice after the spoken text.
I think you can do that because if you allow, you can also whisper while inhaling. So I don't know. If you allow the player to whisper and inhale at the same time, they should have enough air to sing.
Yes, and Luisa did it very, very nicely. So also, when I indicate the inhalation, is this enough? I mean, if I where is it? Inhale somewhere around here. If I define the symbol in the performance notes, is it just okay to not notate it like this, or do I have any differences between the inhalation while fingering a certain specific note, or is it all the same?
It's pretty much all the same. What you will have are just different colors of noise. So, I mean, it does make a difference. The fingering does make a difference, but very little. It's just, I don't even know if you can hear that. I'm sure your player, Luisa, did you say, is playing?
Luisa, yes.
Yes. Luisa has probably done this for you as well, but
okay, well,
that's fine. That's really fine.
The other things are pretty much, I think, self-explanatory. I mean, there is a lot of techniques using breath and speech and air. So this is what I'm interested in. And in a way, a lot of musical theater where the performer has to shout out the syllables. So not just singing. Let me see. Wait. So I don't know, but basically that's it. I mean, if you think that this is written clearly enough,
Yeah, that's certainly clear. I see your air sounds here going from half air to full air to full sound. Yeah, that's very clear.
Okay. So, yeah, anyway, I mean, thank you.
Actually, no, wait a minute.
Yes.
Now I have a question. Now about this in thing. Do you mean in the flute or inhaling?
Inhaling, but in the mouthpiece of the flute,
Oh,
through the mouthpiece of the flute.
okay, and that's explained in the... Okay, I got it.
Okay, so basically I was wondering whether I should write these triangles on the note next as Sciarrino or maybe Luigi Nono did, instead of doing, I think, this or...
You know, I think you could. I think it has a very subtle psychological difference if you do. I think using open note heads here, the triangle is okay, especially if you're under a tuplet kind of, in a tuplet situation. And I know I had this argument about open note heads with Bernhard Lang, if you know this composer.
Yes, of course.
He says, yes, what you say makes sense. I shouldn't use these open note heads, but if I take my score to an orchestral player and I use, like, for example, what you've done here, I don't know if you can see my cursor. Probably not.
No.
What you have first, where you have the half circle and then the open circle and then the full
you think
circle.
this?
He says, if I do that with an orchestral player, they will just play normally. They see normal notes, they'll play normal notes. So I have to use, he says, I have to use open note heads all the time. Because what you have lower down, you have the tuplets, the 5 against 4, is much more intuitive to play as an air sound.
Yes, from a type of Aeolian sound, like half sound and then basically just air. And also I have just one question, if it's possible. Around here when I've written bisbiando, and Luisa told me there are 2 types of bisbiando, 2 types of fingering. She played me, so we opted for the second version. But Luisa, if you're here, could you maybe describe it so I know how to write this second way that you played? This second version.
I mean, it was like one fingering was doing a broader interval than the other, but I don't know how could you write it, really.
Okay. Like maybe a quarter tone, and the other was just, I don't know, like a... Those are 2 I can think of.
Yeah, I was putting this finger in the right hand, and then we tried the ring finger in the right hand, and that was the winner. I mean,
I would then, if you like that and want that as the version, I would take those fingerings and write them in.
Okay.
So just write the precise fingerings. And how would I write this version that you played just now with the quarter tone bisbigliando? Or
well, what I did is I put all three of my fingers down. That goes up almost a quarter tone. That was the first thing, and the other thing I did was to change from a normal A. No, not even a normal A. I played A as an overblown D, as a harmonic on D.
Okay.
And this is the ring finger of my left hand.
Okay. So then should I write the fingerings also in this circumstance?
If you have one that you really want to stick with and you say that's the one for this piece, then you should write the fingering.
Okay, thank you. Well, yes, that's it basically. Thank you for clarifying those questions.
Sure.
Should I stop sharing right now? Right?
Sure.
Okay.
But I would also, before that, I'd like to also talk about, this is not really flute specific, but I would like to talk about how you composers, especially with electronic music, how you coordinate your pieces with, and how you notate your rhythms and your synchronicity with the electronics, either through click track or from your scores.
Well, for this piece, for the next piece I'm going to write, I'm going to have something which is fairly similar to, you know, karaoke screens where you have a line that's going on every syllable and so on. So I'll be having the score. The player will be playing from the score, which will be synchronized with the track. So he won't have a click, but he will just see where the line is going in the score. So I think maybe for him, he said this is the easiest because he knows when the accent will be, he'll see it in his score, everything is synchronized. So in a way, he'll be playing from an iPad. That's that's it.
And does the score, so is the score from the iPad and the electronic sound source also come from the iPad, or is that generated somewhere else?
For this piece, I will have fixed electronics, and for the other piece, I will have live electronics, which will be fairly improvisatory. So that will not be a problem for this. Synchronicity will not be a problem for itself. But for the fixed electronics, I'll be playing it from my laptop, from Macs and so on. And it will be synchronized together with this application I'm just working on with my friend that is like a karaoke, but for contemporary scores. So I set up, let's say, tempo change, quarter tone is equals 60 or 72. And according to that, this line just goes through the stuffs and through the rows. So I think this is one way of doing it quite clearly because he will know when to do an accent, when to synchronize together with some loud electronics, or how to be more precise than just having a click track. Because he said sometimes if the music gets so loud, he doesn't hear the click very well, and he prefers playing maybe from the score, not by heart. So in a way, we've done those two things. So he can play from the score and not having a click track at the same time.
Sounds good. Thanks. I'd like to know from other flutists or composers about your experiences in playing with live electronics and or fixed media. I can say from my point of view that as a flutist, these things can work very well. But I would like to know from you now, I've been talking the whole time. Please tell me what your experiences have been live versus fixed electronics. If you've had good experiences or bad experiences, if you could share them, what are good things to do? What are mistakes that you made that nobody should ever do? Does anyone have anything?
I can share my experience.
Yes.
I used to work with live electronics, and it's like well, for solo instruments and electronics and live electronics, and I work like a duo. Yes, because I give to the musicians some flexibility to play, and I adapt my electronic to the tempo, the timing of the musician. If you want, I can share with you a piece for flute and electronic to show you the notation. Yes.
Yes.
So here is, and I don't be able to share my screen. I think I am co-host now.
Okay.
So great. Just a moment to. I am looking for the piece, and there is the piece. So, a moment, please. Okay. Okay. So can you see the score? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. This is the piece Tropos, and okay. Okay. For instance, I have two lines. One line is for the track that I play, and the other line is from the live effects that I change from the microphone of the flute. So, for instance, here, this is in this rhythmic figure, I start this process freeze. Then I put the exactly rhythm where I start some kind of process. For instance, this is another glissando that I change from the microphone of the flautist. Okay.
Do they have a standing microphone?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
The flute player uses a click track, or you're the one who's streaming all the effects?
I stream all the effects. I don't use. I usually don't use click.
Okay. So there is a flute player and yourself on the stage, and you're just pressing.
Yes.
Okay.
And for instance, in some moments, I write like graphics to the flautist to understand where the flautist is playing. Only yes, it's like a guide, yes, a reference. Yes, for instance, these graphics are only references to the musician. For instance, these references on a grain effect or another kind of grain effect. This is all real-time processing.
And I think this brings up a really interesting subject that, you know, since working on the music of Luigi Nono has been something for me, where we ask ourselves, what is the score? Does it describe somehow what you're hearing, or does it function as a tablature to indicate what the performer must do?
Yes.
And I think it's very clever what you've done. You've used both elements.
Yes, I think it's the better way to work. I don't know, it's the better way to me. I have been trying a lot of kind of notations for this, and I think this is the more practical notation. Yes.
Yeah, I'm looking at this. Yes, I like the way you've done the multiphonics.
Yes.
Got that well. Oh, good. Are you having a workshop also in the festival about this? I hope I'm not talking about something that you have already talked about. Or...
No.
Okay.
No.
All
right.
No, that looks quite good.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
And for instance, this kind of graphic are like how I have to play my own plugins in the program. Well, for instance, this is a well,
so it's your own score as well.
Yes, it's like my score. Yes.
Interesting.
It's a mixing. Yes. So what I start sharing. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank Tomislav for sharing that. We have about 5 minutes if anyone else would like to.
I have a question actually to Evelyn. Are you doing your electronics in Max or some other programs?
I do my electronics in Reaper.
In Reaper. Cool.
Yes.
So
I know that it's not usual to play live electronics in this kind of program, but I don't
if
know.
it works, it works.
Yes.
It doesn't make any difference. But so you are, let's say, you're clicking on the effects on the inserts while the signal is coming through the microphone, right?
Yes, right.
Okay, cool.
And what happens if, for instance, any other flute player wants to perform this piece? you have to cross all the seas and go to play it, or?
Yes, it never happened, but I suppose that I will make a fixed media or something. I don't know.
There is this problem I'm having with fixed electronics that are concerning with signal processing of an instrument. Every instrument has its own timbre. So if you have some processed sound from other instrument, it will not blend so well when somebody else is playing.
It's true, yes. Yeah.
And I've had that problem, and I still don't know how to get over it. Either, I don't know, program some new patches in Max that could allow the interpreter to do it with his own sound. But it's never so precise with live electronics, at least for me.
I think it's very necessary when we're playing with live electronics that we need a sound engineer always on stage.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of the things, like you have to play like the performer, the laptop, which is 50% of the whole performance, and a sound engineer, which gets always the same amount of money of you, but it can save your performance, to be honest.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, you need to have a sound engineer, somebody who knows where to diffuse the sound for the sound diffusion to hear.
Exactly, or maybe feedback, or I know, distortions or something. You always getting more excited more than in a performance time than in a sound check. I mean, that's a classic, right? And we need someone who's doing with the faders down or trying to adjust. So I think it's one of the things that we have to take into account always.
I mean, for that reason, this what you just said, I'm thinking about writing a score just for the sound engineer, just for the sound guy who's going to control everything, because he or she, they need to know at each part of the piece what to do. I mean, usually I am the sound guy because there's no one there. They give me a laptop, they give me a mixer, so I know what to do, but when I can't really travel, I really need to write down everything for them.
Do you know Dialogue de l'ombre double?
Boulez for saxophone.
Yeah, well, originally for clarinet.
For clarinet.
Originally, but there's a saxophone and a flute version, which I made. Yeah, hello. But no, if you look at the original version, there is a score, I believe, for the sound engineer, for the sound projectionist, might be.
And that's nice. That's definitely not redundant. I think it's important. But he knew what he was doing. It was Boulez after all. So.
All right, guys. We've got another minute. If anyone wants any last words or last questions.
I would like to share my experience in working with live electronics, which I found was that there was a break between the physical action you do about pressing a button or doing something, and the sound it comes. It's like when you hit a drum, when you blowing a flute, there is a physical connection, but when you play a button and it sounds like a track falling through a hill, it doesn't make sense playing a button and sounding like that, and that's I think I think I would like to work in, because when I did live electronics, I was just pulling a button. And I was like, oh, I would like to do more to can if I think I should it be louder or be softer or more dissonant, distorted. Sorry, I would like to do more in general.
To show the corporeality, to make corporeality. Is this what you mean? Are you speaking from a composer's perspective?
Yes, from a composer's perspective. Also a live electronics performer, maybe, but yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that. And thank you, everybody, for coming and participating.